In a small, cozy room filled with the soft morning light, a little boy named Leo was already awake. But for Leo, waking up had nothing to do with light. His world didn't begin with the colors of sunrise or the sight of sunbeams dancing on the wall. His world began with sound. The first sound he heard each morning was the gentle creak of the old wooden floorboards just outside his door, a familiar rhythm that told him his mother was up. Then came the soft hum of the coffee maker starting its work in the kitchen, a low, comforting buzz that meant the day was officially beginning. Leo would lie in his bed, his eyes open but not seeing, and just listen. He would listen to the house wake up, to the world wake up, painting a picture in his mind with every sound he heard. Leo was blind, had been since birth. But if you asked him, he would tell you he saw just fine, just in a different way. He saw with his ears. The chirping of the sparrows outside his window wasn't just noise. It was a bright, cheerful yellow, the color of a happy morning. The distant rumble of a garbage truck was a grumbly, heavy gray. And the sound of his father's car turning the corner onto their street was a deep, reassuring blue, the color of coming home. His world was a rich tapestry woven from countless threads of sound, each one with its own color, its own feeling, its own story, but the most important color in his world, the one that painted everything else with meaning, came from a worn wooden case that rested against his bedroom wall. Inside was his best friend, his voice, and his eyes all rolled into one, his violin. To Leo, the violin was not just an instrument. It was a living, breathing part of him. He knew every curve of its body, every smooth surface, and every tiny scratch. He could tell the difference between the fine, gritty texture of the horsehair on his bow and the cool, tight feel of the strings under his fingertips. When he held it, it felt like holding a piece of his own heart. His journey with the violin had started early. His parents, noticing how he would turn his head toward even the faintest melody as a baby, had filled his world with music. They sang him lullabies, not because they were great singers, but because they saw the peace it brought him. They had a small old music box that played a simple, tinkling tune, and Leo would spend hours as a toddler, just listening, his head cocked to one side, a tiny smile on his face. It was his mother who first suggested a violin. She had seen a small, child-sized one at a music shop and thought maybe it could be a way for him to express the world he heard so clearly. Finding a teacher was the next step. They found a kind, patient woman at a local music school who had experience working with children who had special needs. She was amazed by Leo. He didn't learn to read sheet music in the traditional way. He couldn't see the notes. Instead, he learned by listening. His teacher would play a phrase, a simple melody, and Leo would close his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration, and then he would play it back perfectly. It was as if the music traveled from her instrument, through the air and directly into his soul, and his soul knew exactly how to send it back out through his own violin. His practice sessions were a daily ritual. After school, he would sit in his favorite chair by the window, not for the view, but for the sounds that drifted in from outside. He would open his case, the familiar latches clicking open with a satisfying sound. He would gently lift the violin, tucking it under his chin. The feel of the cool wood against his skin was a greeting. Then he would pick up his bow. His small fingers, which had learned the geography of the instrument's neck better than he knew the layout of his own house, would find their place. And then he would play. Some days the music was happy and light, like the birds he heard in the morning. Other days it was sad and slow, like the sound of rain tapping against the glass. He wasn't just playing notes. He was telling stories. He was telling the story of his day, the story of his feelings. His parents would often sit quietly in the next room, just listening. They didn't need to see him to know when he was frustrated with a difficult part of a song. They could hear it in the sharp, angry notes. And they knew when he finally got it right, not because he would shout with joy, but because the music would suddenly soar, becoming smooth and beautiful, full of a relief and happiness that needed no words. It was during one of these evenings that his father brought home a new record. He had heard an orchestra that he thought Leo might like. He placed the record on the player, and soon the room was filled with the most magnificent sound Leo had ever heard. It was a full orchestra with violins, cellos, flutes, and so many more instruments, all playing together in a way that made his heart feel like it was dancing. The music was powerful and grand, but also gentle and full of feeling. He learned that the music was called the second waltz, and the man who led the orchestra, the man with the magical violin, was named André Rieu from that day on. The record became his most prized possession. He would listen to it over and over, lying on the floor with his eyes closed, letting the music wash over him. He could hear the violin singing a happy, bouncy melody, and then a deeper, more emotional part would come in like a beautiful, sad memory. He imagined people in fancy clothes dancing to it in a grand ballroom. He imagined the joy on their faces. To Leo, the second waltz wasn't just a song. It was a whole world, a story he wanted to be a part of. It was the most beautiful color he had ever seen. A quiet dream began to grow in his heart, a secret wish that he kept just between himself and his violin. As he held his instrument at night after his parents had tucked him in, he would sometimes whisper to it. "One day," he would say softly, his fingers tracing the strings, "one day I'm going to play that song. I'm going to play the second waltz." He didn't know how, and he didn't know if he ever would, but the thought of it, the dream of filling a room with that beautiful music himself, became his most treasured secret. It was a dream born not from sight but from sound, a dream that was as real and as vibrant as the world he had built for himself, one note at a time. The dream of playing the second waltz lived quietly inside Leo for a few weeks, a secret treasure he would take out and polish in his mind every night. But dreams, Leo was learning, sometimes have a way of knocking on your door when you least expect them. One evening, his father came home from work, not with his usual tired sigh, but with a crinkled piece of paper in his hand. He had seen it pinned to a community board at the local library, a splash of bright color among the dull notices. "Look what I found," he said, his voice gentle. He sat on the edge of Leo's bed and smoothed out the flyer. Leo couldn't see the bold letters or the picture of the orchestra, but he could hear the excitement in his father's voice. "It's a talent showcase. For young musicians? They're calling it the city's rising stars?" His mother came in and sat beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "That sounds wonderful, dear," she said, her voice warm. But it was the next part that made Leo's heart skip a beat. "And the grand prize?" his father continued, leaning closer, his voice dropping to an almost whisper. "The grand prize is a chance to be a guest performer with a very famous orchestra that's coming to town." Leo didn't need to ask which one. In his world, there was only one orchestra that mattered. The one led by the man whose music painted the most beautiful colors in his mind. "André Rieu?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," his father confirmed. "André Rieu's Johann Strauss Orchestra." The air in the room seemed to change. It felt charged, electric. A secret wish whispered in the dark was now a real, tangible possibility, printed on a piece of paper his father was holding. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. The next day, full of a nervous energy he couldn't contain, Leo told his teacher about the showcase. He described the flyer, the prize, and the dream that was no longer just a dream. He finished by telling her the song he wanted to play, the second waltz. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. He could hear her soft breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was kind, but it held a firmness he had never heard before. "Leo," she said gently, "that is a very, very difficult piece. It's complicated. It has so many parts, so many feelings that have to be just right. It's a huge challenge for a professional musician, let alone someone your age." Her words were like a bucket of cold water. "But I can do it," he said, his voice small. "I know you think you can," she replied, not unkindly. "But this isn't just about playing the right notes. The pressure of a competition, a big stage? I just don't want you to be disappointed. It might be better to choose something simpler, something you can play perfectly, something we know you can win with." Leo felt a heavy stone drop into his stomach. She didn't believe in him. The one person, other than his parents, who understood his music, thought his dream was too big. He hung up the phone feeling defeated, the bright colors of his world fading to a dull gray. He sat in his chair by the window for a long time, just listening. The world outside seemed to be mocking him with its cheerful sounds. But then something shifted inside him. He thought about the way the second waltz made him feel, the way it soared and dipped and danced. He thought about the man who made that music, the man he wanted to meet. His teacher's words echoed in his mind, too difficult, too complicated. And a new feeling, a feeling as strong and clear as a single violin note, rose up in him. No, it wasn't too difficult. He walked over to the record player. He knew its every knob and button by touch. He carefully placed the record on the turntable, the familiar click a comforting sound. He lowered the needle, and the room filled with the grand, sweeping sound of the orchestra. He closed his eyes and didn't just listen. He absorbed it. He let the music flow through him, and he lifted his own violin. He started with the first few notes. They were clumsy, hesitant. The recording was so full, so rich, and his single violin sounded small and lonely in comparison. He stopped, lifted the needle, and played that part again. And again, and again. For hours, that was his world. A few seconds of music played over and over until his fingers knew where to go without him even thinking. His mother would bring him a glass of water, his father would quietly check on him, but they didn't interrupt. They saw the look on his face, a look of pure, unshakable focus. This became his new ritual. Every day after school, he would dive into the music. He wasn't just learning it, was having a conversation with it. He would break it down into tiny pieces like a puzzle. He'd learn one little melody, then another, and then he would try to put them together. Some days he would get so frustrated with a part that his fingers would feel stiff and angry. He would have to put the violin down and walk around the room, breathing deeply until the frustration passed. But he always came back to it. A week later, his teacher came for his regular lesson. She found him in his usual spot, but he wasn't playing his practice pieces. He was hunched over his violin, his face scrunched in concentration, wrestling with a particularly tricky part of the waltz. He didn't even hear her come in. She stood in the doorway, watching him. She saw him mess up, curse under his breath, and then try again, this time a little slower. She saw the sheer determination in his small body, the way he poured every ounce of his being into the music. She listened, and what she heard wasn't a little boy struggling with a song that was too big for him. What she heard was passion, raw, pure, and powerful. He wasn't just hitting notes, he was fighting for them. He was breathing life into them. The knot in her stomach, the one born from fear of him failing, began to loosen. It was replaced by a warm, spreading feeling of awe. She had been so worried about him falling that she almost forgot to let him fly. She cleared her throat softly. Leo jumped, startled. "Teacher," he said, his face flushing. She walked over and knelt down in front of him, putting her hands on his knees. "Show me," she said, her voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Show me what you've learned." And so he did. He played for her, not perfectly, but with a heart so full it seemed to spill out of his violin. When he finished, he waited for her to say it was too hard, that he should stop. But instead she just said, Okay, Leo, we'll do this." Together, from that day on, everything changed. She was no longer just his teacher. She became his partner in this crazy, wonderful dream. She helped him in ways he couldn't do alone. She would describe the sheet music to him, tracing the lines on his hand so he could feel the rise and fall of the melody. She would play a harmony on her own violin so he could hear how his part fit into the bigger picture. His parents became his support team. His mother would make him his favorite snacks to keep his energy up, and his father would sit with him in the evenings, not saying anything, just being there, a silent, steady presence. Weeks turned into a month. The music was no longer something he was learning. It had become a part of him. He could feel the transition from the happy, bouncing section to the deep, emotional part in his bones. His fingers, now with small, tough calluses on the tips, danced on the strings with a confidence that was almost magical. The impossible was slowly, note by note, becoming possible. The flyer was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a map, and he was following it one step at a time towards a stage he couldn't see, but a dream he could feel more clearly than anything else in the world. The night of the talent showcase felt different from any other night. The air in their small house wasn't filled with the usual quiet comfort. It was buzzing with a nervous energy that stuck to everything. Leo could feel it in the way his mother kept smoothing down his hair, even though it was already neat. He could hear it in his father's voice, which was a little too cheerful, a little too loud. For Leo, the world had shrunk to the feel of his violin case in his hand and the rhythmic thumping of his own heart. A drum beating a fast, nervous song against his ribs, the drive to the theater was a journey into a world of sound. The car's engine hummed, the tires whooshed over the wet pavement, and the radio played a soft song, but none of it could drown out the noise in his own head. When they arrived, the first thing that hit him was the sheer size of the place. The moment the heavy doors opened, a wave of sound washed over him. It wasn't just one sound, but 1,000 of them all mixed together. It was a sea of soft murmurs, the rustle of programs, the squeak of shoes on a polished floor, and a low, deep echo that made the whole place feel like a giant, empty cave. He gripped his father's hand a little tighter. His mother's hand found his shoulder, a warm, steady weight that grounded him. They found his seat, and he sat down, his violin case resting carefully on his lap. He ran his fingers over the worn leather, the familiar texture a small comfort in this overwhelming new world. He could hear people all around him, their voices a blur of excitement and impatience. He tried to picture what it looked like based on the sounds. He imagined rows and rows of seats like the ones at the cinema, but bigger and softer. He imagined a high ceiling that made all the sounds bounce around and around. He knew, from what his parents had told him, that at the front of this huge room was a stage, and on that stage was a single chair. Waiting for him, backstage was even more chaotic. The air was thick with the smell of old velvet, floor polish, and a faint electric smell from the lights. He could hear other performers warming up. A girl was singing a song with a high, shaky voice. A few feet away, someone was playing a fast, complicated tune on a piano. It all added to the fluttering feeling in his stomach. His teacher found them, her presence a calm port in the storm. She knelt down in front of him. "Hey," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" "Like my heart is trying to jump out of my chest," Leo admitted. His voice barely a whisper. She laughed a gentle, warm laugh. "That's okay. That just means you care? But listen to me," she said, her hands on his arms. "When you get out there, I want you to forget all of this. Forget the people, forget the lights, forget everything. Just close your eyes and play for yourself. Play the way you do in your room at home. Can you do that for me?" Leo nodded. He could do that. His room was his safe place. His music was his language. He just had to find that safe place on a big, scary stage. Then a man with a deep, gentle voice announced his name. It was time. His father gave his hand one last squeeze. "We're right here," he whispered. "We're so proud of you." A stagehand, a large man with surprisingly soft hands, took his arm. "Okay, son," the man said. "Just walk with me. I've got you." The walk to the stage felt like the longest walk of his life. Each step echoed in the vast space. He could feel the change in the air as they stepped out from the wings. The murmur of the crowd faded into a hushed silence. He felt a sudden, intense warmth on his face and arms. It was the spotlight. He couldn't see it, but he could feel its heat like a small personal sun. The stagehand guided him to the chair, helped him get his violin out, and then quietly slipped away, and then he was alone. He was in a pocket of light and silence, with 1,000 people listening in the dark. He took a deep breath, the air feeling warm and heavy. He remembered his teacher's words. Forget the people. Play for yourself. He lifted the violin and tucked it under his chin. The feel of the cool wood against his skin was an old friend. He closed his eyes behind his glasses, not that it made much of a difference, and let his fingers find their place on the strings. He raised his bow. For a moment he just stood there, letting the silence settle. Then he began to play. The first notes of the second waltz were clear and bright. cutting through the quiet hall like a small bird singing in a forest. In the audience, people leaned forward slightly. It was a child, a blind child, playing a very famous, very difficult song. There was a sense of polite curiosity, a gentle feeling of, let's see how this goes. But as Leo continued to play, that feeling began to change. The music that was coming from his small violin wasn't just correct. It was alive. It had a personality. He wasn't just hitting the notes he had learned. He was telling the story he had heard in that record so many times. The happy, bouncy part of the waltz wasn't just a series of quick notes. It was pure joy made into sound. You could almost see people smiling in the dark, their toes tapping silently on the floor. He was feeling the music, and he was making everyone else feel it too. Then the music began to change. It moved into the deeper, more emotional part of the waltz. The notes became longer, more full of feeling. They weren't just sad. They were beautifully, heartbreakingly sad. It was the feeling of saying goodbye to a friend or watching the sun set on a perfect day. A quiet, collective gasp seemed to ripple through the audience. This was no longer just a child playing a song. This was an artist pouring his heart out. They weren't just listening to a blind boy play the violin. They were being led into his world, a world of feeling and color that they could suddenly understand perfectly. High up in the front row, a man sat watching with a kind, professional smile. André Rieu had seen many young performers over the years. He was always happy to encourage them. He listened, ready to offer a polite, appreciative applause. But as the boy played, his smile began to fade. His head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing in concentration. He wasn't just hearing the notes. He was hearing the emotion behind them, the sheer, unfiltered passion. It was the kind of playing that couldn't be taught. It had to come from deep inside. As Leo navigated a particularly powerful and moving crescendo, the music swelling like a wave before it crashes, the maestro leaned forward in his seat. The look on his face was no longer one of polite interest. It was one of utter, complete disbelief. He was witnessing something truly rare, something magical. And then, as the boy held a long, trembling note full of aching beauty, something happened that stunned everyone who was watching him. A single, shining tear escaped from the corner of his eye. It didn't fall. It just clung there for a moment, catching the light, a tiny, perfect reflection of the overwhelming emotion he was feeling. Then it slowly traced a path down his cheek. Leo, of course, saw none of this. His world had shrunk to just him and his violin. He was lost in the music, in the story he was telling. He played the final notes of the waltz, each one a little softer than the last, until the very last note hung in the air like a tiny, sparkling star, and then faded into complete and utter silence. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was a heavy, sacred silence. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the entire audience was under a spell, holding on to the last echo of the music, not wanting it to end. Leo stood on the stage, his bow still resting on the strings, his chest rising and falling, his own heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. He had done it. He had told his story. The silence that followed the last note of Leo's violin was a living thing. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a full, heavy, vibrating silence, packed with the ghost of the music that had just filled the room. Leo stood on the stage, his bow still resting on the strings, his entire body feeling like it was humming. He could feel the air around him, still and warm, as if 1,000 people were holding their breath all at once. He couldn't see them, but he could feel their presence, a collective, focused energy that was entirely new to him. In his mind, the colors of the music were slowly fading, like the afterimage of a bright light, leaving behind a deep, peaceful blue. Then, it happened. A single clap broke the silence. It was sharp and loud, echoing in the vast hall like a crack of thunder. It made Leo jump. It was followed by another, and then another. Suddenly it was as if a dam had broken. The sound didn't just build, it exploded. It started as a wave of clapping, but it quickly grew into something more. It became a roar, a physical force that seemed to press against Leo's body. He could feel a low vibration through the solace of his shoes as the sound of 1,000 people clapping, cheering, and shouting filled every corner of the theater. It was overwhelming, a wall of pure, positive sound that washed over him, so loud and so powerful it was almost frightening. He stood there, frozen, his violin still held in his playing position. He didn't know what to do. He had never heard a sound like this before. It wasn't just applause. It was an outpouring of something he couldn't name. He could hear individual voices shouting, "Bravo!" and "Amazing!" But they were swallowed by the massive, rolling ocean of sound. The roar went on, and as it did, Leo began to understand. This sound was for him. It was because of him. A small, shy smile started to form on his lips, but the audience wasn't the only one reacting. In the front row, the man with the tear-streaked cheek was no longer sitting. André Rieu was on his feet, clapping with a force that matched the crowd around him. His professional calm was gone, replaced by a look of raw, unguarded emotion. He looked at the small, still figure on the stage, then back at his own musicians, who were also on their feet, their faces showing the same mix of awe and joy. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that what he had just witnessed was not just a performance. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated magic. And he knew, just as certainly, that he could not let this moment end with just applause. While the crowd continued its thunderous ovation, he made a decision. He turned from his seat and walked toward the aisle. The people near him saw him move, and a new wave of excited murmurs began to ripple through the auditorium. The applause didn't stop, but it changed its tone, becoming more expectant. Leo heard it. He heard the shift in the sound, the way the roar was now mixed with a buzz of excitement. He also heard a new sound, the steady, confident footsteps of someone walking onto the stage. The footsteps stopped right beside him. Leo felt a shift in the air, a new presence close to him. He could smell a faint, pleasant scent of cologne and wool. He didn't know who it was, but he could feel the weight of this person's importance. The crowd's roar softened slightly, everyone leaning in to see what was happening. Then a voice, rich and warm and filled with an emotion that made the hairs on Leo's arms stand up, spoke, not to the crowd, but to him. "Young man," the voice said, close enough that Leo could feel the gentle breath of the words. Leo turned his head toward the sound, his heart starting to beat its fast. Nervous rhythm again. Andre acute Rieu had not just come onto the stage. He had knelt down on one knee, so his face was level with the small boy's. He looked into Leo's sightless eyes, not with pity, but with a profound respect that took Leo's breath away. The maestro took the microphone from its stand and held it near his own mouth. His voice now amplified, filling the hall with intimacy. "You did not just play my music," he said, his voice thick with the same emotion that had brought the tear to his eye. "You felt it. You understood its soul. You told its story more beautifully than I have ever heard it told." He paused, letting the words sink in. The crowd was utterly silent now, hanging on his every word. "There are musicians who play for a lifetime," he continued, his voice cracking slightly, "and they never achieve what you just achieved in 3 minutes. You didn't just play the notes. You gave us your heart." Leo stood there, stunned. He could hear the sincerity in the man's voice, a warmth that spread through his chest and pushed away the last of his fear. This was the voice from the record, the voice that had painted the most beautiful colors in his world. And he was kneeling in front of him, saying these incredible things. Then the maestro did something that no one expected. He turned his head to look out at the audience, but he kept one hand gently on Leo's shoulder. "There will be no vote tonight," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "There's no need. We have already found our winner." A huge cheer went up from the crowd, but Rieu held up a hand and they fell silent again. Eager to hear what he would say next, he looked back at Leo, a gentle smile on his face. "But the prize," he said, his voice softening again, just for the boy. "The prize is not good enough for a talent like this." He stood up, pulling Leo gently to his feet with him. He kept his hand on the boy's small shoulder, a gesture of protection and pride. He turned back to the audience, the microphone in his other hand. I am going to change the rules, he declared, his voice filled with a new energy. Because when you witness a miracle, you must respond. And this, he said, giving Leo's shoulder a gentle squeeze, is a miracle. So I am not just offering him the prize. I'm offering him a place. A place on my stage. I would be more honored than I can say, he said, his voice booming through the hall, if this young man would agree to be a guest performer with my orchestra, right here in this city on our tour. The reaction was instantaneous and deafening. The crowd exploded, leaping to their feet as one. The roar was even louder than before, a joyous, celebratory storm of sound that shook the very foundations of the theater. People were cheering, crying, and shouting their approval. It was an announcement that went far beyond a simple talent competition. It was a moment of pure, spontaneous grace, a legendary act of generosity from a master of his craft to a child who had touched his soul. For Leo, the world had become a blur of sound and sensation. He heard the words guest performer and my orchestra. He felt the hand on his shoulder, a steady, grounding presence. He felt the vibration of the crowd's joy through the floor. He didn't fully understand the magnitude of what had just happened, but he understood the most important part. The man whose music he loved, the man from his dreams, had heard him. And he had liked what he heard. He felt his father and his teacher rushing onto the stage, their arms wrapping around him, their voices a mixture of happy laughter and relieved tears. In the middle of it all, Leo just stood, a small smile on his face, holding his violin, the key that had just unlocked a door he never even knew existed. The world that night felt like a dream, and the ride home was the quiet, blurry part between waking and sleeping. Leo sat in the back seat, his violin case beside him, but he wasn't holding it. His parents were quiet too, but it wasn't a nervous quiet. It was a full, peaceful quiet, the kind that comes after something big and wonderful has happened. Every now and then, his father would reach back and squeeze his knee, not saying anything, just letting the touch say it all. We're here. We're so proud. This is real. Leo could hear the smile in his mother's voice as she hummed a soft tune. A little piece of the second waltz. The world outside the car window. A world of rushing wind and distant city lights was just a backdrop to the warm, glowing feeling inside his chest. The next morning, the dream crashed into reality with the sound of the telephone. It rang and then it rang again. And again. All day long it didn't stop. His parents' voices, a mix of excitement and disbelief, drifted into his room. They were talking to newspapers, to radio stations, to people from the television. Leo didn't understand it all. He just sat on his bed listening to the one-sided conversations, feeling a little bit like a spectator at his own life. Then his father came in, holding the small computer tablet they had. "Leo, you need to hear this," he said, his voice full of wonder. His father found the video, the one from the night before. He pressed play, and Leo heard his own music, the sound he had made on that stage. But this time it was different. He could hear the quiet gasps of the audience, the sound of his own breathing. And then he heard the voice of the man, André Rieu, speaking the words he had heard in person. Hearing it again, mixed with the sounds of the crowd, made it feel even bigger. "But that's not all," his father said. He started to read the comments out loud. They were from all over the world, his father said. "This little boy just reminded me what music is really about," read one. "I'm a 70-year-old man, and I'm crying my eyes out." "Thank you for sharing this," said another. "I don't care who wins the competition. This boy is the true champion," a third voice declared. His father read, and with each word, Leo felt a strange new feeling. It was like his small, private world, the world of his room and his violin, had suddenly opened up, and millions of people had peeked inside. And they weren't looking at his blindness. They were listening to his music. They understood the colors he was painting. It was the most amazing, most overwhelming feeling he had ever known. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity that Leo mostly experienced through sound. The phone never stopped. A package arrived with a formal, fancy letter, an official invitation to perform with the orchestra. His teacher came over, and they spent hours not just practicing, but talking. She helped him understand what it would be like, the sheer size of the stage, the number of people in the orchestra. She described the layout of the massive arena, painting a picture with her words so he could build it in his mind. "You'll be a small voice in a very big choir," she told him. "But your voice will be unique. It will be the heart of it." Finally, the day arrived. This time, when they drove to the venue, the sound was different. It wasn't just one theater. It was a huge complex, and the noise of thousands of people gathering outside was a low, constant roar like the ocean. Backstage was a city of its own, a maze of hallways filled with the sounds of people rushing, instruments being tuned, and voices shouting instructions. A woman with a kind voice found them and led Leo to a small, quiet room. "André wanted to make sure you had a calm place to wait," she said. A little while later there was a soft knock on the door. It was him. André Rieu. He came in, and the room seemed to get smaller. Not because he was a big man, but because his presence was so large. He knelt down in front of Leo, just like he had on the stage. "Are you ready, my young friend?" he asked. Leo nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "Good," Rieu said, his voice warm and reassuring. "Don't think about all the people out there. Just listen. Find my violin in the music. We will have a conversation. You and I just follow my lead and play with all your heart. Can you do that?" "Yes," Leo managed to say. Walking out onto that stage was like stepping into another world. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. The noise from the crowd was not a roar. It was a physical force, a hot wind of sound that blew over him. He could feel the vibration of it through the whole stage. He was guided to a small platform in the middle of the enormous orchestra. He could hear them all around him, 100 musicians tuning their instruments, creating a chaotic, beautiful wall of sound that was both terrifying and exciting. He took his place, put his violin under his chin, and closed his eyes. He shut out the thousands of people, the huge space, and all his fear. He just listened. He heard a single, clear note from a violin. It was André Rieu giving him the starting pitch. Then he heard the conductor's baton tap the stand. A silence fell, so deep and complete it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Then the conductor's arm swept down, and the orchestra began to play. The sound that hit Leo was like a warm, giant wave. It was the second waltz, but it was 1,000 times bigger and more powerful than the record he had at home. He could feel the deep rumble of the cellos and the basses in his chest. He could hear the bright, happy sound of the flutes and the clarinets like birds singing high above him. He waited, his fingers poised, his heart beating in time with the music. He was listening for his cue, for his conversation to begin. Then he heard it. The main melody, played by a section of violins, and he knew it was his time. He took a breath, and he lifted his bow. He didn't play loudly. He played clearly, and his small, pure violin voice rose out of the massive sound of the orchestra. It was like a single, clear star appearing in a vast night sky. He was no longer just playing along with a recording. He was part of this living, breathing thing. He played his part, and then he listened as the orchestra answered him, their sound swelling around him. He and André Rieu, somewhere in that sea of musicians, were having their conversation. Leo would play a phrase, full of feeling, and he could hear Rieu's violin answer, a gentle, supportive echo. It was the most magical feeling he had ever known. He wasn't a blind boy on a stage anymore. He was a musician, sharing his soul with thousands of people when the final note faded. The silence that followed was even bigger than the one at the showcase. It lasted for a second, and then the arena erupted. The applause was so loud it was like a physical blow, a joyous, loving explosion of sound that shook him to his core. He felt a hand on his back, and André Rieu was there, guiding him to the front of the stage. The maestro put his arm around Leo's small shoulders and held him tight, turning him to face the crowd. Leo couldn't see them, but he could feel them. He could feel their love and their appreciation washing over him in waves. He stood there, under the hot lights, holding his violin, a small smile on his face, realizing that his dream had come true. But it was even better than he had ever imagined. He had set out to have a famous man hear his music, but in the end, the whole world had listened. and in their listening, they had helped him see that his world wasn't small at all. It was as big and as beautiful as the music he had inside him.